Hey everybody, Eli here. This is a special bonus episode of the podcast. Normally it's Ethan, Caroline, and I talking movies, but today it's a solo episode, and it's all about wrestling. If you listen to the Golden Globes reaction show, you know Ethan and Caroline recently lost our Golden Globes pool, and I am making them watch the Royal Rumble in return. So I made this podcast for them. If you are a wrestling fan or are interested in the history of wrestling, or maybe you used to watch wrestling in the late 90s, early 2000s, or maybe you don't even care about wrestling at all, this podcast is my attempt to win you over. If you don't listen to it, no hard feelings. We'll be back on Monday with more movie talks. But in the meantime, here's Wrestling 101, the Royal Rumble.
Time for the Royal Rumble! This is what we've all been waiting for!
30 wrestlers enter the ring. Their goal is to throw their opponent over the top rope, with both feet hitting the ground. The last person remaining gets a championship match at WrestleMania. These are the rules of the Royal Rumble, an annual event held by the WWE which many wrestling fans, myself included, look forward to all year round. In this episode, we are going to look at the history of the WWE, the history of the Royal Rumble, and we're going to try to figure out why this event is such a fan favorite. But first, let's address the elephant in the room. Is wrestling fake? It's a bit more complicated than that. In the beginning, no, wrestling was not fake. In the years after the Civil War, carnivals hosted strongmen competitions, where two men would wrestle, with the winner being declared the champion. The problem with this was A, people got hurt, and B, it was kind of boring. The wrestlers realized that if they predetermined the outcome of the matches, not only would they get hurt less, but they'd be able to make the matches more entertaining, both of which would lead to more money. If you watched wrestling back in these days, you have all the right in the world to call foul. But the wrestling product we watch today is not trying to pass itself off as a legitimate sport. It's pure entertainment. No, The Undertaker cannot really shoot lightning bolts out of his fingers to explode the ring. No, the world's strongest man did not really impregnate an 87-year-old who then gave birth to just a hand. Holistically, wrestling is live theater turned up to 11. It's everything. It's action, it's drama, it's comedy, it's horror, it's sci-fi. It's larger-than-life characters in a variety show. It's a reality show, it's a talk show, it's a live stunt show. It's a soap opera, it's kabuki theater, it's vaudeville, it's Broadway. It's all of these genres wrapped up in a bow we call sports entertainment. And it's live. In fact, WWE alone broadcasts a minimum 7 hours of new live entertainment every single week without a break.
I definitely don't like it for the fighting.
This is Sean Jasko. He's a writer and actor out of LA who has been watching wrestling for years.
Like, if I was in it for, like, watching people fight, I'd just watch UFC. And I don't watch UFC.
For Sean, it's not about the action. It's about the characters.
I really think that, like, growing up watching wrestling was, like, kind of like watching superheroes, like, duke it out. My love for wrestling comes from my love for comic books. And I think they kind of go hand in hand to me.
This is Mike Schiff. He's also an actor and writer out of LA and a big wrestling fan.
I don't think wrestling fans can actually ever put into words what about it feels like home. You get to watch the anti-heroes, the weirdos, and the fucking rejects, and the straight edge, and like the people either get jacked, fight the jacked guy. You get to watch the people that wouldn't be heroes fucking win.
Is it silly? Absolutely. Is it childish? Sometimes, sure. But it's more than that. It's generation-spanning entertainment. It's older than Marvel. It's older than Disney. Hell, the first narrative film ever released came out in 1895. During that same year, Martin Farmer Burns defeated Evan Strangler Lewis in Chicago to win the American title. Professional wrestling predates modern entertainment as we know it. And before you dismiss it as fake, let's look at what these wrestlers are asked to do. They need to act. They need to do their own stunts. They need to be funny, but also dramatic and charismatic, and make the audience care about them. They need to tell stories, not only with their voices, but with their bodies. They need to travel, months out of the year, away from their families. They are, in every way, athletes, in their peak physical conditions, who train their bodies for years to not only throw a punch, but take a punch. They learn how to fall flat on their backs, how to run the ropes. Sure, the outcomes are predetermined, but the pain is often real, and the injuries are real, and the danger is real. But don't take my word for it. This is what happened when comedian Richard Belzer had Hulk Hogan on his talk show and told him wrestling was fake.
The first thing you need to know about amateur wrestling,
Yes.
or professional wrestling, or submission holds. You just tell me, brother, when you want him to quit squealing, okay?
All right.
It's called a front chin lock. How about it, T?
Keep like that for a little while. Because he's all right. He's just sleeping. He's sleeping. Really, I was asleep.
That groan you hear from the audience was Richard Belzer's unconscious head hitting the ground after Hulk Hogan legitimately choked him out. Hulk Hogan is doing here what many wrestlers have done since the beginning: protect the business. Okay, now I'm going to give you a Cliff's Notes version of the history of professional wrestling. If you're a wrestling historian, yes, I'm going to gloss over quite a few things, but give me a break. I only have a few minutes. The new, quote, warped form of wrestling started in the carnivals became a hit and spread in popularity over the next few decades. In the early 1920s, three fighters, Billy Sandow, Joseph Toots Mott, and Ed Strangler Lewis, aka the Goldust Trio, evolved the wrestling form into what they called slam-bang Western-style wrestling. They changed the presentation, introduced new moves such as body slams and the idea of scripted finishers, and they introduced new rules such as referee stoppage. They also created the first professional wrestling promotion. With this, they now had a roster of wrestlers who they could build long-term storylines off of. The Goldust Trio very much formed the foundation of the professional wrestling product we see today. Should I write a movie about the Goldust Trio? I think I should write a movie about the Goldust Trio. Over the next few decades, more and more wrestling promotions popped up, until practically every state in the country had their own. Each of these promotions ran shows in their territories. The one unwritten rule: promotions could not run shows in another promotion's territory. In 1948, the National Wrestling Association, or NWA, was formed. This was a way for all wrestling promotions to share a champion, who would travel from territory to territory selling out shows. It's like Taylor Swift getting booked on a late-night show. It's guaranteed views for the show, views for the network, and money for the star. It's a win-win-win. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the NWA was famously run by a man named Sam Munchnick. Now, there were far too many promotions around this time to name them all, but here are a few important names to know. Memphis, Tennessee was run by Jerry Jarrett, and they had a bona fide star in Jerry the King Lawler. This was also where Andy Kaufman famously did his thing. Dallas, Texas had world-class championship wrestling run by Fritz von Erich. You can learn all about that in the movie The Iron Claw. Georgia Championship Wrestling in Atlanta was run by Ole Anderson. Remember that name. Minneapolis was run by Vern Gagne, who eventually left the NWA to form the AWA. Remember that name. There was Mid-Atlantic Wrestling, aka Jim Crockett Promotions in Charlotte, North Carolina. Remember that name. And then there were a bunch of others like Dusty Rhodes in Tampa, Dory Funk in Amarillo, Texas, and Stu Hart in Calgary, Canada. And then, in New York, there was Vincent J. McMahon, who ran the Capitol Wrestling Corporation, later called the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. In 1982, Vince sold the company to his son, Vincent K. McMahon, and that's really where our story starts to take shape. The younger Vince had aspirations of taking his wrestling company, now called the WWF, national, and he started running shows outside of his territory. That's right, Vince broke the one rule. He ran his promotion in other people's territories. Classic Vince. He also started buying up other promotions' top talent, including his star attraction, Andre the Giant. In 1983, a few things happened that changed the world of wrestling. First, Jim Crockett Promotions decided to put on a super show called Starrcade, where, among other matches, the NWA champion Harley Race was scheduled to drop his title to Ric Flair. You can see clips from this in the movie The Iron Claw. Before this match took place, Vince McMahon tried to convince Harley Race to jump ship to the WWF and no-show the event. Again, classic Vince. Harley Race declined, however, and Starrcade 83 was a huge success. Really, go out of your way to watch that Ric Flair-Harley Race cage match, it's a classic. Vince's move really angered some promoters, especially Ole Anderson at Georgia Championship Wrestling, who was already angry at Vince for running shows in his territory. At the NWA convention in 1983, Ole Anderson publicly called out Vince, who walked out of the conference and withdrew the WWF from the NWA. Around the same time, Vern Gagne's AWA had a wrestler who was growing frustrated with not being booked to win the championship. According to Vern, there was more money in chasing the title than holding the title, which, for the record, he kind of has a point, but the wrestler was disgruntled and decided to head to the WWF. That wrestler? Hulk Hogan, who obviously turned out to be a huge star. By the way, Hulk brought with him a few other people such as Mean Gene Okerlund, Bobby the Brain Heenan, and Jesse the Body Ventura. Fast forward to 1984. WWF already had a nationally televised show on the USA Network, but Vince wanted more. At this time, Ted Turner was looking to expand his Atlanta-based station, TBS, to a more national audience. At the time, TBS was airing Georgia Championship Wrestling. Vince approached Ted Turner about buying Georgia Championship Wrestling's time slot, but Ted Turner said no. So what did Vince do? He bought Georgia Championship Wrestling. Say it with me now, classic Vince. The problem, however, was that the audience didn't like it. They thought Vince's promotion was too cartoonish. In fact, they didn't like it so much that Vince found himself actively losing money on this deal, and he eventually sold this time slot to Jim Crockett Promotions for $1 million. Fun fact, a few years later, Ted Turner bought Jim Crockett Promotions and changed the name to World Championship Wrestling, or WCW. Vince McMahon, in the meantime, took the money from the deal and focused on his own super show. He wouldn't just book his top stars like Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper, but he also booked celebrities, athletes, and rock stars, such as Mr. T, Muhammad Ali, Cyndi Lauper, and let me check my notes here, Liberace. This was WrestleMania, and of course it was a huge success and remains WWE's primary attraction to this day. The show of shows, the granddaddy of them all, a wrestling show for both wrestling fans and non-wrestling fans alike.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to WrestleMania.
WWF, now more popular than ever, started doing what Vince does best, buying other promotions, inheriting their roster of wrestlers, and, most importantly, archiving their video libraries. WWF was a huge success, the territory days were dead, and the wrestling world never looked back. Now, there was technically a time in the 90s when WCW was more popular than WWF, but that's a podcast for another day. Things you need to know: WWF, who later changed their name to WWE in 2002, is king. WrestleMania is their main event, and their roster is stacked with talent. So when does the Royal Rumble come into play? In 1988, wrestler Pat Patterson, who came to the WWF after Vince took over the San Francisco territory, had the idea for a modified Battle Royal. The Battle Royal is a match type that has been around the world of professional wrestling since before the Goldust Trio. A certain amount of wrestlers stand in the ring and try to push each other over the top rope, until only one remains. It's always been a gimmick match, but a good way for promoters to not only show their entire roster of people, but show the power of their strongest wrestlers. Andre the Giant, for example, was famous for being booked strong in battle royals, to help show how larger than life he was. The problem with battle royals? From a fan's perspective, it's oftentimes hard to follow and a bit chaotic, and often leads to unforeseen injuries. Pat Patterson's idea was to have a battle royal, but let wrestlers come out one by one, 2 minutes apart. This way, each star gets an entrance, each star gets a moment to shine, and long-running storylines are told and advanced. In 1988, they ran the first Royal Rumble as a TV special.
Here are the first two participants in the Rumble. To my right, number 1, managed by the Mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart. From Calgary, Alberta, Canada, a member of the Hart Foundation, Bret Hitman Hart.
The first few Royal Rumbles are fun, especially the underrated 1990 Royal Rumble. But in 1992, they made one significant change. Instead of simply being crowned winner of the Royal Rumble, the winner was named the WWF Champion. 1992, to many fans, is the best Royal Rumble out there. Why is that? 3 words. Ric fucking Flair.
I'm gonna tell y'all with a tear in my eye. This is the greatest moment in my life. When you walk around this world and you tell everybody you're number 1, the only way you get to stay number 1 is to be number 1. And this is the only title in the wrestling world that makes you number 1. When you are the king of the WWF, you rule the world. Think about it like that, Mr. Perfect.
Starting in 1993, the stipulation changed once again. Now the winner of the Royal Rumble gets to main event WrestleMania, which adds a fun mystery element to the event. While it's usually pretty clear to wrestling fans who is going to win, historically the biggest name like Stone Cold Steve Austin or John Cena, sometimes the winner can be a surprise.
You know, hardcore wrestling fans like us will always be excited for this pay-per-view, knowing full well that it will always be a letdown.
What Mike is talking about is not the quality of the match, but the fantasy booking element. Since there are so many superstars, so many stories, and an anything-can-happen mentality, fans like to shoot for the stars and root for their underdog favorite who, very likely, have no chance in winning.
You're able to also tell stories inside that match that can change the course of where things are going to go for the next, like the road to WrestleMania begins at the Royal Rumble. Always.
To many fans, one of the best elements of the Royal Rumble is you never know who's coming out next. This element of surprise keeps fans at the edge of their seats. Are they about to see their favorite superstar? A returning wrestler from the past, such as the Honky Tonk Man or Hacksaw Jim Duggan? Or a new star they've never seen before in a WWE ring?
Even Drew Carey was in the Royal Rumble. And that was awesome. And he eliminated himself because he was one-on-one with Kane. He did the right thing.
To many new fans, the Royal Rumble is their way in. As I like to say, if WrestleMania is a season finale, the Royal Rumble is the previously seen on. You are going to see the top stars. You will instantly know who is the hero, who is the villain, who is fighting who is in a storyline together. You'll know who the audience is cheering for. You'll know who the audience hates. You'll see comedy spots. You'll see dramatic spots. There is no subtlety in the Royal Rumble. It's the ultimate starting point for any wrestling fan. Here's Sean with the drinking game he introduced his wife to.
When I think about the Royal Rumble, I think about, first of all, our Jasko drinking game that we do, which is everybody who watches the Rumble gets a name. Normally you get multiple names. Works best if you have 5 or 6 people, so you just evenly split it. And if your wrestler eliminates somebody, you give a drink. If your wrestler gets eliminated, you have to take a drink. And you kind of go back and forth through that. But that's actually not one of the first dates that I had with my wife, but it is one of my favorite memories because she wasn't really into wrestling, and her first wrestling show she experienced was the Royal Rumble.
And that's the real magic of the Royal Rumble. It sucks you in. It gives you a taste and leaves you ready to watch more.
I think somebody especially Ethan, will appreciate almost the musicality and the composition of of this match in particular, because there are, like we just said earlier, there are 19 stories being told with like 19 sub stories and one main story of who's going to headline WrestleMania.
One interesting thing about 2024 is, for the first time in its history, WWE is not currently owned by a McMahon. They sold to Endeavor in 2023. Vince McMahon is out, and the head booker is currently wrestler Triple H. This, along with some strong storytelling and a stacked roster, leads to a ton of intrigue around who wins this year's Royal Rumble. CM Punk, Cody Rhodes, Gunther, Drew McIntyre, LA Knight, Randy Orton, The Rock, yes, The Rock. All of these are names who could realistically win this year. So who will take it? Tune in to find out, streaming on Peacock, not a sponsor.
I think this is the year where Triple H can really, he's already done a great job of showing what happens when somebody who loves wrestling and has an understanding of the business versus somebody who's obsessed with the business and likes wrestling.
And that's it. That's our show. Thank you so much for listening. Please leave a review if you like this and you want any more of these solo narrative history lesson episodes. We'll be back on Monday talking about movies with Ethan and Caroline. Thanks for listening.
I can't wait to hear what these two idiots think